Hello everybody, you're watching NDTV. A new wave of missiles from Iran has struck multiple sites across Israel, damaging a hospital, and Israel has attacked Iran's heavy water nuclear reactor as the two countries trade fire for the 7th consecutive day. There's no sign of a de-escalation, but will a protracted Iran-Israel conflict impact India, its economy and its position geopolitically? Let me get you the big areas. Number one, rising crude prices. Does that pose a risk of imported inflation? Well, what we know so far is that Brent crude prices have surged with fears that it could spike even more if the Strait of Hormuz, which is a globally important strategic choke point, Iran has been threatening to seal it. If it is blocked, will India be impacted? That's a big question. India is the world's third largest consumer of crude oil, and it depends on imports to meet over 85% of its requirements. Nearly 45% of crude oil imported by Indian refiners in May was likely to have been transported via the Strait of Hormuz that we're talking about. So can oil companies face higher input costs? Will refiners have to look at alternate suppliers? That remain some concerns. Now, the rupee has weakened. We know that due to higher oil bills and global uncertainties. How is that going to play out is another big question. Now, stock markets have largely held steady so far in India, but energy, logistics and airline stocks are under pressure. So will RBI have to delay rate cuts to control inflation? Will that impact growth momentum? That is something that we have to look at later. Now, experts say that the impact of this protracted conflict between Iran and Israel as of now could be peripheral, but number two concern is disruptions amongst key shipping routes that are driving up freight rates. The Middle East, remember, remains a major trade partner for India. Instability in this part of the world could adversely affect trade. Shipping and insurance costs have already jumped for vessels that are passing near this conflict zone, and potential closure of this Strait of Hormuz could also disrupt oil, LNG and goods trade to and from West Asia. So what will India need? India will need safer routes for its energy supplies, and some experts have also said that import-dependent sectors in India like chemicals, metals, fertilizers might feel the pinch. Number three concern, will further escalation dampen global growth with a knock-on effect on India trade flows? Well, let's look at specific examples. We've been talking about how Iran is a key buyer of Indian Basmati rice. Exports are expected to fall sharply due to shipping risks and payment delays. With rising tensions, Indian exporters are facing delayed payments, higher shipping costs and declining demands. As a result, Basmati prices in India are expected to drop. Can farmers and exporters be hit? That remains a concern as well. Number four is also the fact that signs of a global arms race are emerging, and those are raising concerns that developing countries might divert resources towards large-scale acquisitions. Strategically, India faces a double bind here, keeping ties with both Israel and Iran intact while being watchful of how regional instability might strengthen China or Pakistan's hand in the Gulf. The longer this conflict simmers, it's clear that there could be some hits that could be harder to manage. But the good news is that India is currently cushioned by good forex reserves, strong macro indicators and smart oil sourcing. But if the conflict deepens, the risks might rise fast, from pump prices to export earnings and even market sentiment. I spoke to India's Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas, Hardeep Puri, today on the impact of this conflict on fuel prices, and this is what he said.
Thank you, Mr. Puri. Always a pleasure to have you with us. So in terms of energy needs of India, I look have diversified our energy sources in the last 10 years, but how prepared are we when it comes to pricing, when it comes to our energy requirements, specifically with this conflict?
Vasudha-ji, I think you have succeeded in rolling many aspects, many dimensions of this issue into your question. How prepared are we? What will be the impact? We brought in prices and several others. First of all, let me start with the part which is more obvious. For a country which is dependent over 85% or 85% on the crude oil imports for its requirement, yes, the situation as it unfolds globally will impact us without doubt. A country which depends 50% on imports for our natural gas requirements equally will be impacted. But having said that, let me say two things. One, is there is more oil available on the global market than at any point in recent history. Production, new product producers are coming on the market. I'm not referring just to Guyana, where it still has to come on stream, but a big find has been made. More suppliers in the Western Hemisphere. The United States is the largest producer, 13 million barrels they produce per day. They are going to add another 1.5 million barrels. Canada, Brazil, etc. So there's more oil coming on the market. Even if there were not to be the case, please recall that OPEC Plus and others had cut back production. It used to be 102 million barrels a day. They cut back 5 million barrels in order to limit the supplies available so that prices could be shored up. We have diversified our sources. On a typical day, we consume 5.5 million barrels of crude for refining, or a little more than that. What comes through the Straits of Hormuz is only about 1.5 million. So at one level, I can answer your question and say, if that I don't get that 1.5 million coming from there, I will increase my domestic production, don't export, and because I'm also not an insignificant exporter, I will buy more from other sources. There's one country from which we used to buy 800,000 barrels or 1 million barrels a day. We cut down to 500,000 because more oil is available and we are able to diversify. So there's no problem on the availability side. Okay. On the price-wise, look, the Prime Minister has already demonstrated that if a government is conscious of the needs of its consumers, on 3 occasions he brought the price central excise down. I'm talking about November 2021, May 2022 and March 24. Central government reduced its excise and BJP states also reduced their VAT. I think as a result of the central government's action, the price came down by 13 rupees and 16 rupees respectively for petrol and diesel.
Right.
Okay, now, if tensions escalate, will the route be closed, the Straits of Hormuz? Frankly, people agonize about that. But as far as I'm aware, in the last 50 years of our history, of the history of this region, Straits of Hormuz has never been closed.
But sir, do you see that as a possibility? And also, if that happens, what will be the impact
Even
on the freight expense?
Causes of some concern. First of all, why would the Straits of Hormuz be closed? Because somebody would want to see it closed. I don't see it in the interest of either China or Iran. China, why? It's a very big consumer of the energy which comes through those straits. And Iran, because it produces some of the energy which doesn't go elsewhere, it goes there. So it would not be in their interest to close it. Would it be in the interest of the others? Yeah. Well, I think since President Trump came into office, he has been talking about drill, baby, drill. Yes. He is keen to bring the price of energy down. And drill, baby, drill is intended not only to ensure that enough energy is available in the markets, but price is reasonable and inflation comes down. So I'm not convinced that the United States would want that either.
In layman terms, is there anything that the common Indian needs to worry about when it comes to fuel prices? Do you see that going up in some times?
The common Indian, I don't know who the common Indian is, all of us should be very conscious of the fact that this is a Prime Minister who, if at all he brings prices down, he doesn't take them up. I mean, on 3 occasions, as I said, November 21, May 22 and March 24, he brought the central excise duty down. Even, and there, by the way, we are continuing to feed 80 crore people 3 meals of dry ration in a day, even though the pandemic is over. So I don't think that should be a matter of concern to a common Indian. But, in a warlike situation, and today you can use that term without any fear of contradiction, it's a very serious escalation of the military conflict. I hope wiser counsels prevail. And as the Prime Minister has been calling, others have been calling for cessation of hostilities in return. But our discussion is anchored if that doesn't happen. 3 points I want to make for you. We have enough stocks. Yes. We have enough diversified supplies. Even if there were to be disruption in supply lines, We can source it from alternate sources. We have enough. Our 5.5 million barrels a day, which goes into our refineries for petroleum and petroleum product, I don't think that is something we are unduly worried about.
Okay, that's very nicely said. Mr. Puri, also, we saw the Congress party attack you yesterday because you were talking about India's, stance and positioning. How do you see that attack on you, the personal attack on you, and specifically with regard to Trump-Munir's meeting and the Congress calling it a triple jhatka?
See, I'm not going to get into issues of meetings and people's luncheon. That's not my portfolio. I would also not respond to the Congress party, but since you said it's an attack on me, all I can say is I was mildly humored. I was mildly humored because I wear this kind of a criticism as a badge of honor. I mean, somebody turns around and say, I was a failed diplomat. Well, your government appointed me as a permanent representative to New York. The rest is history. We won our Security Council seats. I think out of 189 countries voting, we got 186, which is a record of sorts. And I don't want to get into that because that gentleman who spoke, he also went on to say that I'm a failed minister. That I found even more endearing because my record speaks for itself, whether they're... But I don't need his certificate. All I can turn around and say is that when the Congress party resorts to having its spokesperson, self-styled or appointed, attacking a minister and attacking me, I think something I must have said has really stung them. And has stung them badly because instead of... he also added that I'm parroting the PMO line. I found that particularly endearing. And I want to thank him for it through your channel. Because if as a minister I can correctly echo the government's policies, particularly those announced by the Prime Minister, then I think I must be doing something right.
Well, India's petroleum minister there saying that India is prepared for the crisis that the world might face with a protracted Iran-Israel war. Economist Madan Sabnawis joins us now. Mr. Sabnawis, thank you so much for your time on NDTV. What are the various sectors in India, sir, that need to be watchful? How do you see the overall impact of Iran-Israel war on India, its economy, and specific sectors?
The war between Israel and Iran, the way I look at it is that it's more of a localized war. When I say localized war, it is in the sense that Iran today has been banned from any international relations in terms of trade with the rest of the world. What this really means is that while it does produce a significant proportion of crude oil, it is not free to sell it in the world. Of course, it does to China, but that is a different set of an issue, and it's not really a large amount. So this said, I think what we are seeing in terms of how India could be affected, it's going to be more of a kind of a peripheral nature. When I say peripheral nature, it's more a case of saying that if the crude oil price goes up any further and remains in a higher trajectory for a longer period of time, then of course there would be macroeconomic implications. But what we have seen is that if you go back to the Ukraine war, you go back to the Hamas war which took place, in case of Ukraine, we saw maybe around 3 months before things reverted to the normal. In case of Hamas, Israel, there was actually no impact in terms of crude oil price. And today, if we're looking at Iran, which though is a producer of a significant amount of oil, but it doesn't really contribute significantly to global supplies. So there's no physical demand-supply mismatch coming on account of this war. So what we see is going to be more a psychological factor of crude oil price moving up. And that is something which could have implications for India.
Right. Mr. Sabnawis, I was looking at how the currency markets have not reacted, and the stock market has remained largely indifferent so far in India. So what are the potential best and worst case scenarios that you can talk about here in the context of this war? And how likely, is an escalation going to impact Indian economy? And what are the larger, macroeconomic changes that you're talking about, which might be due to this war?
Yeah. So if you look at it, see if crude oil price goes up, automatically our import bill goes up. If our import bill goes up, the trade balance goes up. The trade balance goes up, there is definitely pressure on the currency. So what we have seen is that there's been some minimal impact on the currency. The rupee has tended to depreciate a little bit. But if you see how India has done vis-a-vis the other currencies, it's not really done any different. because we have a positive factor in terms of the dollar being weaker in the market, which means that other currencies tend to strengthen. So I think there's been a kind of a balancing act between what's happening to the USD and what's happening on account of the trade front. But when crude oil price goes up, I think the impact will be on the WPI inflation, not really on the CPI. Now, why do I say this? Because when you're talking of WPI inflation, we have a weight of around 7.5% for the oil basket. And the moment crude oil is imported at a higher price, now we may not be paying the Brent price, we may be paying something lower because we are importing around 1/3 of our oil from Russia, which we typically get at a discount. But still, there would definitely be some kind of a pressure in terms of the WPI inflation number. Now, this could be affecting our producers, means manufacturers who use oil products will see that their costs are going up. So there will be some kind of a pressure as far as that's concerned. Maybe if your aviation turbine fuel price goes up, airfares could rise after a timeline. But if you're looking at the CPI, we have one very fortuitous development which has taken place in the last few years, which is that the government has kept the retail prices unchanged in both the cycles. Now, what are these cycles I'm talking of? When the crude oil price comes down, the benefit is not really passed on to the consumer. The government and the OMCs are the ones who are sort of redistributing these gains. But when the price goes up, we don't pay a higher price, and it's being absorbed from these buffers which are being built by the government and OMCs. So therefore, the CPI inflation number per se may not really change significantly, which means from the point of view of monetary policy, I don't think they need to look at any option when we are talking in terms of crude oil price moving up. The third impact will, of course, be on the budget. So this is just the last thing. So if we're talking about the budget, today we don't really have much of a petrol subsidy. Whatever is being given is more for LPG. It's around 13,000 crores, which is not much. So that's not something which is really going to affect us. So the fiscal remains largely unchanged. There could be some impact on the WPI, not much on the CPI. Trade deficit going up, which means currency could remain a bit, fidgety for a short period of time. But I don't see any major significant impact on the Indian economy as of now.
Okay, Mr. Sabnavez, also with the Middle East situation expected to remain volatile for some time now, and this has been happening for over 2 years, what policy measures should India adopt to minimize the impact on its economy? We see that the freight costs are rising, crude oil prices, like you mentioned, have also spiked. We are also talking about importing inflation due to Israel-Iran conflict. Is there something that the government can do here?
Okay. Now, if you're looking at crude oil, see, actually only the crude oil price has gone up in the market. If you're talking of other commodity prices, they have not really been affected by what's happening in the current situation. So what this means is that my imported inflation is going to be more on account of crude oil prices going up and how this is being transmitted through the system. As I mentioned earlier, the CPI inflation is something which would not be affected much because of petrol and diesel prices, which we as individuals are paying at the petrol station, will remain unchanged. It's not something going to get affected. But however, if you're talking of the wholesale prices, there could be some kind of a marginal impact. So can the government do anything? Probably not at this particular point of time, because prices are free. We are importing at whatever the international prices. I mean, the policy of the government will be probably to negotiate more with countries like Russia to get prices at way more favorable terms. So that's what could probably be done. That's something which the government will be having at the back of the mind.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Sabnavez, for joining us on NDTV. Mr. Sabnavez there on the way forward. Now, a crucial aspect to all of this is also geopolitics. As tensions rise in West India, how will India build and improve its strategic diplomatic positioning, especially in Gulf diplomacy, port access and energy security? That is what we talk about next. We have with us former diplomat D.P. Srivastav. Thank you, Mr. Srivastav, for joining us on NDTV. My first question to you, sir, diplomatically, how do you see India handling something like this? Because we see that Iran is getting destabilized, but we have some very strategic projects like Chabahar and, of course, the IMEC corridor that's also coming up. Do you think that all of this could be sidelined by rivals like China and Pakistan? How do you see India maneuvering the situation?
It's not a question of China and Pakistan outmaneuvering India. It's a question much more fundamental, which is it's an existential question for Iran. If Iran survives and it remains stable, then Chabahar and INSTC can go forward. If there's a war and instability,
Right. Ambassador Srivastav, also India is known to have good relations with Israel and of course with Iran. How do you see that playing out diplomatically? What kind of position does India have with respect to its own bilateral ties with these two countries now, sir?
We have trees, and this, in order to maintain the equilibrium, bring the tensions down, this is not something which India alone can do. This requires, first of all, some agreement between the parties, and certainly there should be no attempt to reflect by third parties joining in, and that is the biggest danger.
And how do you see this? What are the longer implications of this protracted war, or if this conflict just goes on for some more time? How do you see this playing out? What are the larger ramifications for India? How can India prepare itself better for something that is to play out? Because we've also seen US-Israel alignment. Of course, Iran leaning closer to China and Russia. How is India going to maintain its autonomy without being cornered diplomatically? Do you see such challenges there?
40% of India's oil supplies come from the Gulf. Oil is a fungible commodity, so in case of a conflagration, it will not simply be the supplies coming from this particular region, but there will be a price shock which will also cover oil coming from other sources. Now, $1 increase in the price of oil adds something like 12 to 14,000 crores to India's annual import bill. So this is a huge amount, but the situation is not limited only to the economics. We have a small number, a fairly small number of, about 1,500 Indians in Iran. But on the other side of the Gulf, there are 7.1 million strong Indian diaspora. If there's a with the entry of US, we don't know which way President Trump will do a major flare-up, and the consequences could be unforeseen. It may be recalled that you go back to 92 Gulf War or 2002 Gulf War. The military outcome was decided very quickly. That is not in doubt.
Right.
But the political instability continued. And it continues in that region. So it's easy to force a military outcome. It's very difficult to stabilize the region, what follows next. And as we have seen, eventually, America was forced to withdraw from Iraq. And in fact, most of the Iraqi oil fields have now gone to China. So the consequences of war are entirely unforeseen, and it cannot be seen from the prism of short-term military gains by one side.
Right. Thank you so much, Ambassador Srivastav, for those insights. Military outcomes are, of course, easily quantifiable, but like Ambassador Srivastav points out, that sometimes the uncertainty that follows is of course very difficult to gauge. The Israel-Iran conflict is something that we talked about, and it is far from creating economic tremors in India, but of course people have to be watchful. The country has to be watchful. There are potential fears of rising oil prices, something that has already begun, and a weakening rupee to export hurdles and diplomatic balancing act. Indian markets have remained stable for now, but tensions could expose cracks, especially in fuel costs and also some exports and West Asia linked trade. Strategically, India has to keep up ties with both Israel and Iran, and also keep its trade ties with the Middle East thriving. With that, it's time for a short break. More news on the other side.